Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris Perek Dalid, beginning Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Lamed Dalid, and we are starting Daf Lamed Dalid towards the top of the Amid by the new Mishnah. The Mishnah will elaborate more on two of the Shisha Devarim that are Kivei Maisris Midrabanan. First of which is Shabbos, and as we mentioned earlier on, let's go with the approach that since it says in Yeshayahu v'karas ala Shabbos oineg, which means that eating on Shabbos is called by the Torah pleasure, it adds to the pleasure, so that gives significance to even what otherwise would have been defined as casual eating, as chashuva eating, as formal eating, because the Torah is calling it an eating of pleasure, and therefore it's going to be koiveya it. Now, when we speak about Shabbos being koiveya, what we'll have new in the beginning of the Mishnah is a concept that when a person puts produce in a basket and he's designating this basket for Shabbos, according to Beis Hillel, Shabbos won't only be koiveya it when Shabbos comes in. From when one made that designation prior to Shabbos, that food in the basket is rendered tevel, which would mean that you may not snack from it prior to removing maisris. That will be the first topic of the Mishnah. The second topic in the Halacha Beis will be melach. And here again, the Mishnah will elaborate. And we already spoke out these words, just to quickly repeat them, that there is a difference between having something saturated in salt. That type of salting is koiveya lamaisris, very similar to cooking. In contrast, when you dip something in salt, much lesser amount of salt on the item, that generally will not be koiveya it lamaisris. It's only dipping, and still by dipping, the Mishnah will differentiate between dipping one olive versus dipping two olives or more at the same time. Always two or more means that you have them in your hand together, etc. Similar to what we learned before when we learned about seiruf, as it's applied to mekach, as it's applied to other areas. One versus two or more, and the Mishnah will also differentiate between when you take olives and you dip it into salt, there is a difference whether you will put it back into the vat if you won't finish it. That will render that olive less established because it still belongs to the klal, versus items that for whatever reason, even for tumantara reasons, you will no longer put back. That renders its removal and its salting, even only in dipping, as something more chashuv. One of the big topics that we will learn today, which is a shas sugya, that on one hand, minors don't have machshava, which means that those areas in halacha for which you have to have intention, even if the minor has intention, halachically, it's not enough. There isn't enough focus, there isn't enough development. But if they are doing an action, and through their action, it's clear what the intention is, then, not always, but in our sugya, then we will give validity to the machshava that's nikeres mitoich masayim. That will be a big part of today's daf. And finally, quickly going back, just as an intro, on daf tezvav, we had a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding Shabbos. Shabbos is one of the Shisha Devarim that's koiveya, and the machlokes there was what were to happen if food was not designated to be used on Shabbos. Reish Lakish holds that Shabbos is only koiveya for foods that were designated to be eaten on Shabbos. That means, according to Reish Lakish, if foods were not designated to be eaten on Shabbos you can't eat from it. Make no mistake. L'kula alma. On Shabbos, v'karas ala Shabbos oinig, food that was not tithed may not be even snacked from on Shabbos. There's no such a thing as achilas arai on Shabbos, halachically. The question is how and what will be the status of this food after Shabbos. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the food is rendered established tevel, even if it was not designated for Shabbos. According to Reish Lakish, the food has to be designated for Shabbos. This machlokes will play a lot into today's daf. Let's leave it at that, and let's hit it right inside the daf lamed dalet on the Mishnah. So as we mentioned, Shabbos. This Mishnah speaks about two of the Shisha Devarim, Shabbos and Melech, beginning with Shabbos. It's amazing how the Mishnah right away, milsa agav urcha kamashmalon, memes ikonis hashma, not from tzeisai chavim. The Mishnah already loads many things together. The focus is how is Shabbos Kiveya, when is Shabbos Kiveya. And by the way, like we just mentioned, this Rabbi Yechanan and Ish Lakish will be very consequential. But we'll get to that in the Gemara. So the Mishnah begins like this. If miners gathered fresh figs, and they gathered them to have them on Shabbos, I remember as a kid, in Brazil, there was only one kosher nash, one candy. How my sister and I, we would push it, we would put away, we would hide some of the candies for Shabbos. I understand, you put something away for Shabbos. Now, even according to the Shlakish, Shabbos is koiveya when you designate it for Shabbos. It's being designated for Shabbos. But normally, okay, it's designated for Shabbos. When may you not snack from it? Normally, you would say from Shabbos. But let's go. Now, the shachach la'asron, the shachach cannot go on the minors. B'chlal, minors cannot tithe to begin with. And the father did not tithe it. So we say exactly, since they were designated for Shabbos, lo yei achlu matzoi Shabbos ad sheyei asru. They may not be eaten after Shabbos until they will be tithed. Let's read inside. Let's learn the Mara folder. Right, all the way on top. First of all, he says, if you want to teach me a din of how Shabbos is koveya, don't forget, you don't need all of the shisha devarim. You only need one of the shisha devarim. Normally, when you think about children putting things away for Shabbos, where do they do it? In their home. That can't be the case of the Mishnah. Because if the Te'enim were brought home, I don't need Shabbos to be Kaveya. That's it. The Riyas Pnei Bayis was Kaveya. So it must be, it was speaking about that they are in the field. The Iba Bayis, Beloy Shabbos, just the Bayis was already Kuvu'u. Number one. Number two, the Mishnah is not telling you dinim of minors. It's a secondary din. That the Nakat Tinoikas, to teach you va'ashmeinon, the yesh lohem machshava hanikeres mitoich maseyim. In other words, for something to be designated for Shabbos, that's an intent. One would argue that the intention of minors, correctly so, are of no consequence. But since they gathered, the act of gathering is called a maisa, even though you don't know that they're gathering it for Shabbos. The Gemara is going to go into that. That's enough. They're gathering for something. So there we do give halachic weight to their machshava. So now we have te'enim that was designated for Shabbos, even by minors. If adults did it, pshita. Shabbos is kaveya. Exactly, that's the point. So the Mishnah says, I'm reading in the Mara folder, lo yeyachlu matzoi Shabbos. And what the Mishnah is saying, Shlem, is two things. Number one, prior to Shabbos, they could be snacked from. In contrast to the next case in the Mishnah. It's very important, these details. If it's gathered in a kalkala, in a basket, we'll see, at least according to Beis Hillel, you cannot even eat from it before Shabbos. It's a better kaviyus, stronger designation for Shabbos. Here, it was not designated in a basket. Okay, the kiven shekovatan Shabbos lemaiser. The first thing the Mishnah is telling you, once Shabbos comes, now asurim lo oilem at yasru. Now, even though it's not Shabbos anymore, eating during the week is not v'karas ala Shabbos oinik. There's no oinik halachically. Once Shabbos came and these items became kavu lemaisres, that's it. That din never goes backwards. However, if you have kalkala Shabbos, a basket that was filled, let's go with the figs, for Shabbos, putting something in a basket, putting something today in a bag, in a box, is a stronger designation. What I mean by a stronger designation is, what is the likelihood? Is there a chance that you're going to undesignate it? When you gather it not in a box, you can change your mind. When you put it in a box, we'll see in the Gemara, people were very careful. Once food was separated for Shabbos food, this is the ethic. This is not a halacha. There's nothing usur to eat from it, but people did not want to take from it. You only take from it if you find something even better. But normally, this is already in a box, in a basket. So Beis Shammai says that, okay, putting it in a basket is no different than gathering it outside a basket. The word poitrin only means that you are allowed to snack from it before Shabbos. When Shabbos comes, for sure you cannot snack from it. Even after Shabbos, that's what the Mishnah says. Even Motzoi Shabbos, you can't eat from it. Asru. Putting it in the basket, Rabbi Shammai, is the same. But Beis Hillel mechayven, that's the chiddush. They hold that look inside the Marafulda, Beis Hillel mechayven b'maiser miyad afilu koydem Shabbos, because the kivin sheyachad ol Shabbos hu kva'a miyad. So that's beautiful. So now we have this this rule, two nuance. Shabbos is koveya even after Shabbos. Milsa gavurcha, that it has to be designated for Shabbos. Now, all of this is a huge problem with Rabbi Yochanan, because again, Rabbi Yochanan holds that Shabbos is koveya even if items were not designated for Shabbos. So we're learning the Mishnah the way that Shlakish learns it. We're going to have to tweak it a lot. Rabbi Yochanan, we'll learn that in today's daf. The next step of the Mishnah is that if you put it in a kalkala, I think the same thing would be in a box, in a bag. In the Mishnah, in a basket, it's Beis Hillel, it's even stronger. Shabbos is koveya it even before Shabbos. We had something similar way back when you were traveling and you already stopped to be in a place for Shabbos. This is not that. But there we also learned the concept that sometimes Shabbos is koveya even before Shabbos. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to leave Rabbi Yehuda for tomorrow. I'm just going to read the words. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af haloiket kalkala, this concept of putting something in a basket that makes that item stronger designated. It's a stronger, it's already in a basket. And the kavana there was l'shloyach lechaveroim, to send it to your friend. Lo yoichal ache ya'aser. You may not eat it until you take off meiseres. In other words, it becomes tevel even before he sends it. Now, why does it become tevel? I want to leave that for the Gemara. Has two approaches, so let's leave it for the Gemara. Okay, one way will be mekach. One way will be as matana is kemekach. So mekach establishes, and this nakuda, that since it's in a kalkala, so there's a very low chance that this person will change his mind. He already put it in a basket. So the rule already begins from now, even before it happened. And we'll see again. We'll see another way of learning Rabbi Yehuda. We'll leave Rabbi Yehuda for later. Now, the next part of the Mishnah is to elaborate more on melach. Melach is another one of the Shisha Devarim. We already learned in the beginning of HaKoivesh, we made it clear that there is putting something in salt, kashering meat that most people never even saw. That's called melach. That melach, mamash cooks it, takes out the blood. And then there is dipping something in salt. Dipping something in salt generally doesn't give it the kvius. It's nish azach chashav azach. But let's go. So hanoitel zeisin min hamatan. You have olives in a vat, and I want to make it clear that we're speaking about olives that are going to be turned into oil. We've already learned this many times. And one of the first steps was to put olives in a vat to make them soft, to make it easier for you to squeeze them into oil. That was from where you took it. So, toivel echad b'melach, if you want to nash on them, you can not only take them out, but they would also dip them into salt. This is not bona fide salting. This is just dipping into salt. Dipping into salt is not melach and devoichel. But what's amazing is that even though you're only dipping it in, when are you allowed to eat it? If you're eating one at a time. But if you salted an olive and you put it in front of you, and then you took out one more olive, which means you have two or more. Again, the two or more we had seiruf in a different application. So now, Zok the Mishnah, now you're going to be chayev, which is quite amazing. In other words, dipping will be koiveya. I want to say something. Two or more gives, there's another, we're going to get more into the Gemara, but let me just remind everyone of the following. Even though many times we have a machlokas tanoim, but let's, as a rule, begin with the premise that the shisha devarim are only going to be koveya when you have a gemar malacha. These items are not nigmaru malachta. They are not nigmaru malachta. On the other hand, you remove them. You plan to eat them. If you plan to eat them, that was the kasha we always said. How can you say there's no gemar malacha? If you're eating them, for you, it's nigmaru malachta. So for that, we responded is that if they came from their source and they're nearby, and if you change your mind, you would put it back. So they still are considered items shaloi nigmaru malachta. Remember these ideas. And that will be very helpful in understanding what's the difference between 1 and 2. Now, Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to have a lot more. Rabbi Eliezer says like this, that min hama'aton hatohor, if you took these olives from a vat, meaning that the vat is tahor, but you have to add, the person is tamei, so when he took the olives, he was metama the olives, which would mean that he won't put it back. Why not? Because he doesn't want to be metame the olives in the vat. So since he took 2 or more, compounded with the fact that he's not going to put it back, now we say that this little amount of salting, first of all, there's Gemar Malacha. Gemar Malacha is because they're no longer part of the olives in the vat. The olives in the vat are loy nigmar malachtan. They are going to be turned into olive oil. These olives are nash. Normally we say, so what? It's nash. It's part of the group. It's not part of the group. You won't put it back. And now, noch, you took 2 chashav, and you, even though you only dipped it, when you put all of these things together, nigmar malachtan, melach chayev means you're not allowed to snack. But if you took the olives from a vat, and the olives in the vat are tamei, so what that you're tamei? It's the olives are tamei anyways. So even if you took more than 2, even if you took 2 or more, not more, 2 or more, even over there, you remain pater. Why do you remain pater? Even though, let's go, that's taking 2 or more and only dipping, that's called melach, but it's loy nigman malachna. You took it to eat, you can put it back. Anything that you took, and it's easy for you to put it back, and there's nothing stopping you from putting it back, we considered what you took to still be part of the group from where it came. It's like when a Yid does something wrong, he can always come back. So he's never out. Yisrael, Yisraelu. So what that he removed himself? He'll come back. Only if he can come back is he separated. That's gewaldig. Okay. Says the Mishnah. Oh, final rule, I forgot to speak this in the intro. The final rule of the Mishnah is going to be, how does one define achilas keva, achilas arai, when it comes to drinking wine? It says the Mishnah, shoisin al hagas. Don't forget that we learned just yesterday, right, which means Friday, last year, or 2 shiurim ago, that putting wine in a cup is in itself, makes that drinking, remember that, into a achilas keva. When it comes to wine, you're drinking out of a cup, that's already considered a formal drinking. If the person is leaning over the gas, I don't care if you took a cup, that type of drinking is called arai. So shoisen al hagas, you are allowed to drink wine if you are leaning over the wine press. Bein al achamin, bein al atzoinen. Whether you diluted the wine with hot water, whether you diluted the wine in cold water, the difference will be that when you dilute wine in hot water, you will not put back the leftovers. It will ruin the wine. Even if you added water to make it more drinkable, because in the times of Chazal, wine was very concentrated, the water that's cold that you added doesn't stop you from pouring back the leftovers, which is again important. The more I can pour it back, the more I'm going to argue, forget about any other the shisha devarim, forget about that. Loy nigman malachtan. When is wine nigman malachtan? When you skim the shemarim off the top. You did not do it over here. But on the other hand, if you can't put it back, there's such a logic, and you put it in a cup. Don't forget, even shaloi nigman malachtan, we learned, you cannot have a su'udas keva. Forget about the shisha devarim. And even though you put it in a cup, when you're leaning over the vat, that's not called achilas keva. And Tanakama says, hot water, cold water, it's garnish, you're potter. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Elazar Berab Tzadok agrees in principle with Rav Meir that when you drink wine leaning over the wine press, you cannot call that formal drinking. But he has a gzeira, they say. It's very easy for a person going from drinking, leaning over the wine press to standing upright. It takes a little movement and you're not over the wine press. And now you're drinking out of a cup. So he's machayev you. He doesn't like, you put wine in a cup, you can never drink it. Wine is very chashuv. Drinking wine is called achilas keva. Achilas keva is also even bepeiroi shaloi nigman malachtan. The chachamim, they make this difference. If you put hot water in the cup, which means you're not going to pour it back, even though you're leaning over the wine press, but the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Elazar Barab Tzadok. Come on, it's very easy for you to take a little, you'll be upright. So then you're chayiv, which means you may not drink from it prior to tithing it. But if you added cold water inside the wine, which means that there is a chance that whatever you won't finish, you're going to pour back. If you won't finish it, not a chance. If you won't finish it, you're going to pour it back. Because no one was bothered with you adding some water to the wine. They just didn't want to add heat. Heat might have ruined the wine's development into better alcohol. So now you're going to be potter.
Also, like you can have a stand, or
Potter means that as long as you're leaning over, you cannot stand up, because drinking wine out of a cup is already called achilas keva. Let's look inside the Mara Fulda, 2 lines under the Gemara. Rabbi Elazar Rab Sadik Mechayev, first of all, like we said, he agrees with Rav Meir in principle. But Elamai, the Gozar, Shema Yoitzi min hayayin chutz lagas. Alacham men chayev shu kaiveya, lefi she'enu yochel lahachzer es hamoyitzer she'kalkal hayayin shebegas. Aval soinan shebemezek bit shemazak bit soinan pater she'yochel lahachzer hamoyitzer. So twice in the Mishnah we had this differentiation, whether you could put it back, whether you can't put it back. Makes no difference whether you could put it back or not because of halachic reasons of tum and tara, or whether because practical reasons, you don't want to ruin it, makes no difference. If you could put something back, then even though it's removed, it's still considered part of where it came from. And then generally in these dinim, it's going to be a leniency will come from it. Okay, we're good. Amazing. Says the Gemara. So the first thing we learned in the Mishnah was Shabbos. Shabbos is koveya. The Mishnah said that if you put it in a kalkala, then it's already koveya lebesilul, before Shabbos. If you don't put it in a kalkala, it's only koveya from Shabbos on. Now, when do you need to have aviv, the shmoina, the shisha devarim? Only when you're taking the produce home. If you are taking items in the field and you plan to sell them in the market, we already learned that. If these items had gemar melacha, in many cases, not only did you put them in a basket, but you covered them, then we learned already earlier on, then you don't need any of the shisha devarim. You don't need the iyas panei bayis. You don't need that. No, we learned that since a purchaser might come to the field and you'll sell it in the field, it's already nitbal in the field. Now, our Mishnah is already telling you that a child, a minor, who designated something for Shabbos, because of using the words that we read in the Mara Fulda, when you have a machshava hanikeres toich masein, that machshava is consequential, so therefore it's considered designated for Shabbos. So let's take it to the next nash. So says Rab Hamnuna, tinoik shechipa kalkala. If a child was the one that gathered the produce in the field, not only did he put it in a basket, but he covered the basket. He did the action that makes gemar melacha. And what was his intention? Lashuk, to merchandise it. So just like we see in our Mishnah, that the child's designation for Shabbos is consequential, so I'll tell you one better. If the child was the one that decided to sell it in the market, then that should render those items already nitbal, lemaisris, already in the field, which is the rule. Something that's being merchandised doesn't need the shisha devarim. Nitbala. Why? Makoim shemachshavtoi shel gadoi miskayemes. That's what it gets from the Mishnah. In any area in halacha where an adult's intention without a maisa will be consequential, which will be the balabas deciding, am I taking it home? Am I taking it to the market? Over there, by the adult, by the gadol, he doesn't have to do anything. He has to just be honest. They have to ask him, what was your intention? So since the intention of the adult will determine whether it needs one of the shisha devarim or whether it's already nitbal basade, based on our Mishnah, sham maisav shel katan miskaimim, the action of the katan. Now, what's the action? Intent accompanied with an action. What's the action? It's amazing. The action of covering it with leaves. It's amazing. The action of covering it leaves, again, you can argue, that action in itself, what does that mean? And by the way, when children gather, what does that mean? When you say machshavta nikeres...
Is this child labor?
What was that?
This child labor, basically what's going on here?
Of course.
So he has kids working for him, so it goes by the intention of the balabas. And the kids are just his little farm workers or whatever.
Then he's asking a question which has nothing to do with a minor or an adult. Your question is independent of minor and adult. You're making a good point that not anyone's intention could be effective to determine shuk or bias. Whose intention could determine? Only the balabasses. Accept it. So either we're speaking about a case where this child is the balabas, or we're speaking about a case where the owner gave to the child the right to determine what to do with it, but that's independent. And by the way, the same thing goes with adults, Danny. Making a good point. You understand? But that's not what Rav Amnuna is coming to teach you. Let me go better. When you say that a child's intention is valid if it's nikir, if you can see, if it's linked, if it's accompanied with an action, how much must one see objectively in the action what the intention is? I think that's really what Rav Hamnuna is saying. In our Mishnah, just because children gather figs, if you wouldn't ask them for when are you gathering it, you wouldn't know. You don't gather it different for Shabbos than for the weekday. You don't do that. But nevertheless, the Mishnah holds, it wasn't that they thought. They saw figs and they thought. That would not be valid. Machshavtan of a tinnik is ein la machshava. But the fact that they gathered it, the action, it's enough maisa to say, now what they had in mind is enough. So Rabbi Nuna says, so then I'll tell you one better. Danny, you're right. If they are the ones that have the right, whatever that case is, if they determine to sell it lashuk, it's amazing. Even though their maisa is a normal maisa, when you cover things, that you package it. It's packaging. That's the way you package it. Yeah, if they were the ones doing the packaging, and they are saying that we had in mind while we were packaging it to sell it lashuk, says Rav Amnuna, then nitbal.
Doesn't it make a difference if you are a child of the owner as opposed to a child?
So again, Vlad, yes, it makes only a difference whether who gave you the right to make that determination. But again, I was telling Danny, and if it's not a child and an adult, let's say it's not a same kasha. Can any adult determine to sell it in the market? No. Avada, whose machshava will be valid? Someone who has that power.
Clear.
It's not needed. It's not needed. It's not needed. The way I see it. Okay. Daf lamed daled amud beis. Now it comes Rab Ze'era and he challenges Rab Amnuna. Klum machshavtei shel gadol miskayemes. Klum machshavtei shel gadol miskayemes ad sheyiftach lashuk. Covering the basket, Rab Ze'era holds, is such a non-machshavtoi nikeres from this maisa, because prior to opening the basket in the market, prior to doing that, covering the basket means nothing. I think covering the basket is even less than gathering in the Mishnah. I'll tell you why. Because if the children simply want to eat the figs, they would eat it. Why would they gather it? Gathering it already shows that they're saving it. Covering the basket means nothing. You can cover the basket to take it home. They did it. You equally cover the basket to open it in the market. In other words, when do you know it's for the market? When you take it to the market, when you open it in the market. So he argues with Rav Hamnuna.
You need a stronger mindset.
In other words, you need the nikeres, not a stronger meiser, something. It has to give you a circumstantial evidence of what the intention is. Covering, according to Rab Ze'era, is nothing. It is a meiser, but it's not nikeres mitoich meiser. Again, in the Mishnah, it's a little bit more. Because if you want to eat it right away, you wouldn't gather it. Ulay. Anyways, the Gemara is not giving you Rav Amnuna's answer. Rav Amnuna doesn't care. Rav Amnuna will agree with Rab Ze'era. He doesn't need for there to be the nikeres. He needs for the machshava to be accompanied with a mais, the way I understand it. Okay. Says the Gemara, this whole premise, this whole topic, that you have to have machshavtoi nikeres mitoich maisav, I have a problem on that from our Mishnah. Frag the Gemara, our Masni says, our Mishnah, pligal Rav Amnuna. What does our Mishnah say? To and the owners, the owners is a minor detail because a minor, even if he's the owner, he cannot be ma'aser. So v'shak chula asron lo ye'achlu l'motzoi Shabbos ad sheyis asru. So what's the kasha? The kasha is, where do you have machshavtoi nikeres? Okay, let me go back. This nikeres. How is there gathering it any indication that they're saving it for Shabbos? There's no indication. And the Gemara is going to say there has to be some indication. And therefore, for it to be some indication, it must be that they will, the understanding in the Mishnah is that they collected it mamish at the end of Friday.
This is exactly what Rabbi says. It doesn't have to be such a care.
But there has to be something. According to everyone, there has to be something. But the gathering it, if it wouldn't be near Shabbos, I'm gathering it Wednesday. Could be I'm gathering it for Wednesday night or for Thursday. Let me reword it. Very good. Even this whole topic, L'Rab Ze'eda even more. There has to be some nikeres. It can't stam be a maisa. There has to be something. If you're gathering it Friday afternoon, so then either you're going to eat it or you're going to save it. Now, again, is it a raya? Maybe you're gathering it from Monday. Could be. There's not a clear, but there has to be some indication that it's for Shabbos. In the Mishnah is only if you gather it before Shabbos. When you cover it with leaves, maybe according to Rav Amnuna, when people took it home, they didn't package it so good.
So that brings the question: how could you even make an assumption that you're gathering from the sugar if you're doing it by the redness of the sun at the end of Erev Shabbos? So how do you?
No. The case of the Mishnah, the case of Rav Amnuna is not the same case. Not the same case.
No, but the Mulchama shows that
you're saving it for Shabbos.
Yeah.
You're saving it for Shabbos.
For Shabbos, not for.
No. Shuk is separate. Shuk is not them du mechama. According to Rav Amnuna, when you package something, if you're taking it home, you wouldn't package it so good. That has some indication. You're covering it the way you sell it in the market. Rab Zayda says it's not enough. Rav Amnuna says it is enough. But according to everyone, there has to be some sort of nikeres mitoich maisov. Not there is a maisa and you're just gluing on a machshava to it. Now we got a problem. Like we mentioned in the words of introduction, that we have on Daf Tezvav, we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Eish Lakish. Rabbi Yechanan holds clearly that produce becomes nitbal b'Shabbos, even if they were not designated for Shabbos. So this whole Mishnah doesn't work according to Rabbi Yechanan. This whole topic, machshavti nekeres, I don't need any machshava. I don't need anything. Shabbos comes. Like the whole Mishnah, and if the kids didn't gather, that's what Rabbi Yechanan holds. So frag the Gemara, leis hadad, doesn't this entire Mishnah contradict the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan? The Rabbi Yechanan Amar, that Hashabbos Toivelis, if you look on Daf Tezvav, Hashabbos Toivelis, even for items that were Bechlal not designated for Shabbos. So, in other words, how does it contradict Rabbi Yechanan? The Mishnah is implying that why is it the Toivel? Why was Shabbos Toivel mepnei sheliktum l'Shabbos? Which implies ha'im liktum shaloi l'Shabbos. They were gathered, but they were not gathered for Shabbos. For when? Who cares? They were gathered for any time. So then, l'cha'ira loy. That goes against Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabbi Yoina, again, b'shem Rav Amnuna, the second time today, that no, our Mishnah does not contradict Rabbi Yechanan at all. Rabbi Yechanan stands his ground. Shabbos is toivel even for items that were not picked for Shabbos. Narvos then, the chiddush of our Mishnah is, what's the next din in the Mishnah? Aviv. That if you put it in a basket, you already cannot eat it prior to Shabbos. So the Mishnah is telling you, let Rabbi Yechanan, that Shabbos will be toivelit, and not only on Shabbos, but for after Shabbos, that's of course. The chiddush is that even though they were gathered for Shabbos, and even though it's a minor, but the minor's machshava, that's nikeres metoich ma'asav, is a machshava. So you would have thought, now that it was designated for Shabbos, you should not be allowed to eat from it even before Shabbos, because it's Shabbos food. That's the only side of the chiddush of the Mishnah. To tell you that afilu likram l'Shabbos, oichel mehem aray le'erev Shabbos, that's gavaldik. I want you to know that it's clear that Rav Hamnuna himself doesn't paskin like Rabbi Yechanan. No, it's the first thing that we learned on Amud Aleph. Rav Hamnuna says that if a minor covered it lashuk, all of that is because Rav Hamnuna was learning that the minor's designation l'Shabbos is going to be valid because there is enough nikeres. So Rav Hamnuna paskins like Reish Lakish, which is a chiddush. Because like we mentioned, there are only three dinim in which we paskin like Reish Lakish. The rule is we paskin like Rabbi Yechanan. It doesn't matter. That's we. Rav Hamnuna paskin like Reish Lakish. Rav Hamnuna is interpreting li Rabbi Yechanan how he would learn the Mishnah. Now, says the Gemara, afilu al did Rab Shimon ben Lakish, leis hahi pliga. Just like you asked the question against Rabbi Yechanan, well, I can ask another question from our Mishnah, even on Reish Lakish, which is, leis hi pliga, doesn't our Mishnah contradict Reish Lakish? How? The law tinoikes inun. The Mishnah is speaking about children. Vafilu liktam l'shabes, kimi sheliktam shaloi l'shabes. And the same way it was asked without understanding this machshavta in nikeres metoich ma'asav. Since the ones were minors, and since we know the klal that minors don't have machshava, you, Rabbi Shlakish, holds that you have to have a designation for Shabbos. How is their designation a designation? So from another angle, so Rabbi Yosi, b'shem Rabbi Hila, it must be tiftoid shaliktam imdim dumechama. And here again, we have this concept of ohicheyach maisa lohem al machshavtim. In other words, both Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish, you have to align to this concept. And that's the milsa agavurcha, like we mentioned, that when there's an action that indicates on some level what the intention is, even a minor's intention will be effective halachically. Chevra, we have time. Let's go into Daf Lamed Hey. Now let's go into the second case of the Mishnah. What was the second case of the Mishnah? That when you put it in a basket, now lebesilal, which we paskin like besilal, it's already, Shabbos is kaveya even before Shabbos. What do we have? We have the concept in Hayom Yom, that on Yom Revi, we say Luchun Ranana in the Shir Shal Yom. That Shabbos, the name is Barchan, Kula Yom, and another thing just to good to know. It took me a long time to hear this. I always understood that just like you have a machlokes in the Mishnah, if a person discovers that they don't know what day of the week it is, they realize, I b'chlal don't know what's happening. We all get there, it just takes us a while. I don't even know what day it is. So when do you keep Shabbos? So what I'm saying now is not accurate. Also, good to know. There are many details on what I'm saying. So there's a machlokes tanoim. Either count 6 days and on the 7th make Shabbos, Kibre Yosei Shal Oilam, or tonight is Shabbos, Kibre Yosei Shal Adam. It's from God's perspective, Shabbos is the 7th day of the week. From Adam Arishan's perspective, even though he was created on Friday during the day, but a full day begins with night. What was Adam's first full day? What came first to Adam? Shabbos. So that's the machlekes. I'm saying it's not fully accurate because it's not so black and white. Don't forget that keeping Shabbos, I'm going to be machmed, I'm going to keep Shabbos. You know what you don't do on Shabbos, Aviv? You don't put on tefillin. You know what a man has to do every week? He has to put on tefillin. Whenever you are being machmed, normally you're being machmed, you're being mekel. So it's not so pashut, and it's not that way. It's not stam keeping Shabbos. It's not that way. But this machlokes is also explained as, how are you to view Shabbos? Is Shabbos day 7? Is Shabbos day 1? How would Shabbos be day 1? That in Chassidus we learn a lot how Shabbos the minay mizbarchen kula yomim, which means everything that will happen in the coming week is connected to Shabbos, very much like Rosh Hashanah. Everything that happens in the year begins on Rosh Hashanah. So we have this idea that Shabbos the minay mizbarchen kula yomim. Al pi drush, what I said is correct. Accurately, when it says Shabbos, the words in the Zohar, the name is Barchan Kol Yom, you know what it means? It means that Shabbos blesses all of the weekdays. Which weekdays? It's another Hayom Yom. Not the whole week. Shabbos blesses 3 days before and 3 days later. That's the Luchun Ranana, that from Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are being blessed from the next Shabbos, as is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And that also is manifesting in the halacha that if a person didn't have yayin or any other liquid that's kosher, secondary, to make Havdalah, you get to do it up until Tuesday. Why am I saying all that? Because here you have a din that Shabbos food is koiveya backwards. Okay. He wants you to know, bekalkola shel te'enim he must nisom. Dafke. In other words, if you would have loose produce, that's the whole word of the tinoikes. Loose produce is not koiveya, even though you designate it for Shabbos. He's not the chiddush of B'Shem Rabbi Shai is not the te'enim, it's the kalkola. No, he's emphasizing why is it different? Because you put it in a basket. Devei Rabbi Yana Yomri. No, I disagree with you. It's not only in a basket. I'll give you another hechatimsa where your designation will already affect a nitbal prior to Shabbos if it was designated for Shabbos, and that is nitzra, which means that if you have a branch, not a basket, you broke a branch off a tree and you decided, this branch with however many figs on it is for Shabbos, that's also considered designated for Shabbos, in which Beis Hillel will say, from now, from the designation, nitbal. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Loza ben Abtignas, B'Shem Rabbi Loza ben Rabbi Yanai, that tiftoir, according to the second, Devei Rabbi Yanai, B'te'ena ha'miyuchedes l'Shabbos, and a chanami. In other words, our Mishnah is not contradicting it. Our Mishnah gave an example of a kalkola, but it doesn't have to be a kalkola. I want to tell you something else. If the entire tree was designated for Shabbos, then when the branch is broken off, even if the branch was not broken off for Shabbos, but it's coming from a tree that was designated for Shabbos, according to the Vei Rabbi Yanai, that also will become nitbal immediately. Even b'shoigeg, if the tree was designated for Shabbos. If there was a designation for Shabbos and it's still mechuber, nothing to talk about. The Mishnah gives a mashal of kalkola, but he's extending the Vei Rabbi Yanai that even if the branch broke off b'shoigeg, or the branch was not broken off l'kavod Shabbos kodesh, but the person prior to that said, this tree, good figs, this tree will be for Shabbos. Then now that it's disconnected, it's already nitbal midrabanan because Shabbos is koiveya. And the Gemara gives you a story to prove that Dalma is a maisa. Dolma, Rabchia, and Avimi, and Abisi. Havayos, when they were sitting, Avad Chati in Kalkolot Te'enim, someone passed by them and they had a basket of figs, and they told him, Lizabu, and they were hungry. Can you please sell it to us? Amalon, he told him, no, Kalkola Shabbos. I already decided to put this away for Shabbos, and he had this Jewish ethic. Kalkola Shabbos, Eina Mizabna. I'm not selling something that I designated for Shabbos. Look inside the Rashirilio, second to last line in the right column. Kalkola Shabbos lemizdavna. That likitzim. This is a proof to Rabbi Yanai. This is not, in other words, it's not only because he put it in a basket for Shabbos. No. There was a fig tree that was designated for Shabbos. Likitzim mi ilan, which was the tree was designated for Shabbos. And once a person had this concept that this is for Shabbos, he told these three Amoraim, even if you give me all the money in the world, even if you give a high price, I don't sell food for Shabbos. And that's behind Beis Hillel. Why is Shabbos kaveyat? If a person would allow oneself, even after designating something for Shabbos, to change his or her mind, okay, I designated for Shabbos. When you put aside a thing of wine for Shabbos, don't have it during the week. It's very important. When you set aside something for Shabbos, Shabbos food. Many people use the word Shabbos food for after Shabbos. Weißt du, Cholent on Monday, Shabbos food. First of all, Shabbos food is gavaldik. That's the whole din of the Mishnah. Special. But even before Shabbos, Toyameh Chaim Zachac, that's something else. That's not against the cover of Shabbos. But for you to sell it, once it's designated for Shabbos, it becomes holy for Shabbos. And that's the reason behind Beis Hillel. We'll stop over here and we'll